Light it.
Light it.
Bruce wasn't moving either.
We are back.
You guys have theme music now?
Yes,
we
we've
got
been
the random
had theme
voice
music.
from the back. Bruce, stand by. We haven't even introduced you
I'm
yet.
sorry.
I love it. I love it. Rob Stone, Mark Ingram, Urban Meyer here with you. Yeah, Bruce Feldman will join us in a second. As always, thanks for joining us. Please rate, subscribe at Apple Podcasts, Spotify, wherever you get your podcasts, as well as across social media. We can be found at 3X Option Show. New episodes coming your way every Wednesday on YouTube or wherever it is you get your podcasts. Today, we're going to get you up to speed with our friend Bruce Feldman after one of maybe the biggest changes in college athletics ever. We'll hear about that and a whole lot more, including the playoff system, with the Big 12 commissioner, Brett Yormark, a little bit later in the show. Then we are going to preview LSU's season and take a look at this year's College Football Hall of Fame candidates. I'm looking at you, Mark Ingram, the second. But our lead topic, it was launched on Friday as a California court granted approval to NCAA's landmark 3 antitrust cases, bringing in a new era for college sports in which athletes can be paid by their schools. A lot to digest. Here are your basic headlines. Student athletes going back to 2016 to 2024, they are eligible for a portion of $2.8 billion.
I got questions, Stone.
Wait, hold on a second.
I got questions.
Oh, you got a question because you're not 2016,
Yes.
right?
Yes.
I got it.
Yes.
As of July 1st, schools can pay players on their roster. That's any sport. There is a cap, however, which will be 22% of revenue, which is projected to be about $20.5 million for this season. Schools, they can do whatever they want with that money. They can spread it however they see fit. That's going to be a big talking point. And there are escalators in place, so that number will get bigger over the course of a 10-year deal. Yeah, guess what? It's just a 10-year deal. We're going to have to deal with this again at some other point. And then the new College Sports Commission will oversee enforcement with the help of a Deloitte-run NIL clearinghouse, not the NCAA. Coach, I know you've got plenty to say about that in just a moment. But to help us answer some of these questions, work through some of the semantics, we welcome in, finally, properly, our good friend from Fox Sports and The Athletic, Bruce Feldman. Good morning, Bruce. Good to have you, buddy.
Hi, Bruce. You ready?
I'm ready. I got all your.
All right.
I hope I got some of your answers because I don't know.
All right. So we had James Franklin on recently, and he was incredible, and he enlightened us. I read a lot of this stuff, and to be honest with you, I'm about as cynical as you can imagine with it nonsense. When I started hearing people say, "Well, now there's rules," Bruce, for 38 years, I took a test every year. I signed a piece of paper saying we're going to follow the rules that we'd pass the test. You had to study a 3-inch or 4-inch rule book, and we would get tutoring from our compliance people. So the rules, it wasn't a question if there were rules. No one followed them. I shouldn't say no one. A lot of people followed them. Some people made a decision not to, and it would drive coaches crazy. So that's the first part. Second part is enforcement was comical. Comical might be the nicest word I've ever used with that. It was absolutely ridiculous when people would commit major violations and 4 years later they'd punish the team that had nothing to do with the violations. So here's the question for you. This College Sports Commission, James Franklin, broke the rock yesterday when he said that there is subpoena power and you're going to sign a piece of paper saying that you will not litigate. So Tom Mars, the famous attorney that basically I credit him with destroying the NCAA because everything was litigated, is no longer. So it's going to be expedited enforcement, tough enforcement, and it's subpoena power. That means they're going to subpoena people immediately to get to the bottom of it. I'm still cynical. What do you hear on that word?
I talked to some coaches, Urban, who within the last 2 days, who are very cynical as you are, as honestly as we all are, because we've been paying attention for a long time. You're taking one head coach I talked to at a power conference said, I don't know why right after this went through, they did not have the 64 power conference head coaches and their ADs on a Zoom call with Brian Seeley. That is the former MLB executive who has now been in charge and is basically the executive of this organization overseeing what is essentially is compliance. Because right now, he said different schools have different interpretations of the
Wow.
rules, which
Here we
Urban,
go.
when you mentioned compliance a bit ago, that was always one of the issues. I mean, I would go back to, and I don't know if you were still in the SEC at this point, but there was a prominent school with a very successful head coach. And I remember other coaches who had been, had talked to people who'd worked there who said, you know what, their compliance directors never shows up at any of the practices to see who's actually coaching, who isn't, all these other things. So there's always been bending of the rules. I think one of the harder parts from this, from the people I've talked to over the weekend, was going to be you have all these middlemen and agents who are now been in the process, right? Because we've had 5 years of NIL. A lot of those guys aren't regulated. A lot of those people aren't regulated like they are. Mark had an NFL agent. That was a regulated person who
Right.
answered somebody. A lot of these folks really haven't. And they're also getting 20%. Mark wasn't getting,
Wow.
imagine, like a lot of them are getting 20% of
The
if
uncertified agent is getting 25, 25,
some of them
20%.
are 20%. Yeah. And so what you end up with is coaches and administrators saying, wait, we have like 5 days to turn all this paperwork in. We're going to chase after. Like, I guarantee you, because the head coach I talked to yesterday said, I don't know every deal my players have done NIL wise. We don't know. Just like my AD doesn't know every speaking engagement I've done. So I think it's a good idea in practice. We're gonna see it's gonna be really messy. It was messy before, like Urban. I could see you were nauseous when you talked about the NCAA investigative part. That's exactly where I think this is headed. Maybe there's more teeth behind it, but they thought they had teeth behind it before, and it didn't really hold up. So we'll see.
What's amazing, Bruce, is that, and I told this before on a podcast with Mark and Rob, is that the template is pretty well set. You want to end something, you make it ridiculously, the punishment so hard that people won't do it. That's only been that way for 3,000 years. So I don't get why that's hard to figure out. The steroids used to be a big deal in college football. You know what happened, Bruce? They said you're finished if you use steroids. And for the most part, steroids are out. I know there's still stuff out there, but not like it was when I played. So number two, and then I'll hand it off to the other guys. Number two, Bruce, you start hearing a billion. And once again, the skepticism in me just in being around college football for 38 years, 2.8 billion. It can be 9 billion. Who cares? When does Braxton Miller get a check? Who's the check from? And is it a legitimate check? Or is this
And
all
why
just
doesn't Mark
gonna
Ingram get a
disappear?
check?
And we're gonna appeal
Was
Mark
Braxton
Ingram.
in that window? Was he done it before 2016 though?
Okay, I'm sorry. I'll
I mean,
use
bad example, but yeah, I get
I'll
where
use
you're.
I'll
Yeah,
use Chase Young then, or
yeah, good.
someone,
I mean,
or
look, and
Joey
Chase,
Sorrentino. A guy that was a walk on.
And why doesn't
yeah,
Mark Ingram get a check?
I think it's hard for them to manage as far back into that window because then if it's you, Mark, then all of a sudden, Urban, you were a safety at Cincinnati way back when. Should Urban have gotten some money? Rob was a high level senior
Yes,
He's got a
we
player.
should
picture
all get
behind
some
him. Look,
money.
he's got a picture behind him.
That's right.
So seriously, let's go again. Okay, say I'll give you a name. It was a 16. So
Chase Young, Mike
Curtis
Thomas,
Samuel. When does the check show up, and how much will it be, and who writes it?
Honestly, on how long it takes them to go through, because we're talking about thousands of athletes. I
Right.
don't know how that process is going to get expedited. I'd be lying if I told you how quickly, because I think right now, a lot of the people I've talked to are so focused on how does this work with the NIL bubble that's already out there, and how does this work going forward? The back money, which you think, okay, people are going to come forward who are in that window and say, go to their universities and say, okay, who do I have to talk to get that? I don't know how they streamline that process, to be honest. That's something that, hasn't come up in the conversations I've had.
I'm about to sue their ass.
You won't be the first or the
You
last.
won't be the first, you won't be the last. Exactly.
All right. Anyways, but Stone, I mean, Bruce, man, we appreciate you appreciate you coming to, parlay with us, man. And we know we've been expecting this. We know some schools have been preparing for this. We know some schools are gladly going to be using that 20.5 to pay their players. Now, will all schools be required to pay their players? And like, what if they don't want to pay? Like, do they get to opt out? Like, what goes on with schools who
Well,
are
you'll get
against
left
this?
behind, and I think at that point, a lot of your student athletes are gonna be like, "Hey, do I really wanna go to school there where I can get a better deal someplace else?"
Right.
You know, if they can make it work, and I think what you could see is other schools who cannot financially make it work, maybe, and 10 years from now, 'cause as Rob said, there's a 10-year deal here. Are there way less programs playing major college football at the end of it?
Mm.
Is it a sustainable model for them? I think that's the part that's going to be interesting. There's a lot of levels to that, and that's another piece of it that I think will be fascinating to see who can hold up and who can't.
And now the 20.5, they said over 10 years this thing can increase. So this is like next year it could be 25 million, in 3 years it could be 30 million. This is like a
It's
increasing
all on
salary cap like the
escalators and
NFL.
Yeah,
right.
yeah. I think the part that is significant, and this is again something that was brought up by an administrator I talked to last night, which was this all kicks in soon, July 1st. It's less than a month away. There's a lot of schools, and maybe it's 15, maybe it's 50, it's probably more like 15, who have been working ahead. So, there's one school I've heard of in the SEC. They already have like a 30 to $35 million NIL budget that is kicked in. Maybe they hold off on the 15 million that they're expected of that 20 million that they're expected to take from revenue share, and hold that for January 1 and say, "Hey, we already got our roster allotment signed up from the NIL balloon we have in our NIL group. So maybe we hold off till Jan 1 when we can start really haggling to get what we need for our next year's roster." I think that is something it'll be interesting to see who strategizes that way, how they handle what they have in NIL, because it seems like it's a different pot of money. And I think that's the part that is going to be the hardest for Brian Seeley and the NIL Go people to kind of sort out.
So we introduced the College Sports Commission to the landscape. What exactly does the NCAA still do with college football?
I mean, they didn't do that much with college football as they did to like college basketball, right?
Right.
I mean, Urban, somewhere you have trophies. I don't think they say NCAA on it. It's not like, if you had, I think you were at Florida when Billy Donovan won basketball championships, right? Different
Right.
trophy. The NCAA ran that. The NCAA runs, lacrosse and soccer and everything else. The NCAA
Yeah.
wasn't that involved. It was involved in the enforcement piece of it. But as you said earlier, Rob, right now they're not in the enforcement business as it relates to this. So their role has gotten further and further diminished. And I think that's only going to keep happening as the TV money and the power structure, the power conferences have more influence. I mean, let's not kid ourselves. Like Tony Petitti and Greg Sankey are the ones who are really
Yeah.
running everything at this point. And I think the NCAA and Charlie Baker can talk about whatever he wants to talk about. But I think people know when it comes to college football, it's a different deal than it is for every other college sport.
Yeah, for sure. And
I
Bruce,
want
you,
to. Oh, I'm
go
sorry.
ahead,
Go ahead.
Coach.
I just I'm mesmerized by this because I lived it and I spent hours in our compliance office and it was dead to rights. This is they did it and nothing ever happened. So the whole thing about enforcement again, you had 3 schools recently get involved in some pretty egregious so-called, I'm not going to call the schools out, but uh, pretty egregious violations. And the reason that took place is because they probably laughed at the compliance. They laughed at the fact that if we got caught, who cares? It's a joke. Uh, is there, in fact, subpoena power? Start there.
That if they get behind it, because if it's something they've agreed to with courts, because I think what the biggest concern with all this is lawsuits are coming, right?
Right.
And so I think that part of it, meaning, okay, are we going to be protected? You can sue anybody for anything in this country, right? And it doesn't mean you're going to win, but I think we're going to see more of that. And there used to be Urban, like, and I think this still holds with the NCAA. If you get caught lying to the NCAA, the NCAA could come down. That was, to me, the worst crime you get. That was it was always the cover up was worse than the crime. If you get caught what they think lying to the NCAA was a lot more damning to them than what some of the infractions may have been.
We're going to find
So
out.
Yeah, and again, I think right now, again, this is right from a power 4 head coach. He was like, "We haven't been on any Zooms. They haven't told us our
Wow.
interpretation of what this is seems to be different than other coaches in our conference." And that he this coach was super frustrated. He was like, "You know what? There's a model that where really would work well, and it works well at the highest level, and that's the NFL model." And, like if you talked about, cheating and steroids and different things, like there are hefty fines and punishments if you have too physical a practice in the NFL, or about 18 other things that Mark could probably talk to you about that he lived through in the last 10 years. And the NFL model has done that, but it's done through collective bargaining. And I
Right.
think I know we talked about this the last time I was on the show. There's a lot of people who feel like that's where this is headed,
Yes.
because they said the powers that be, they may want to go up, like to have the politicians involved, but they laugh at that because like the politicians barely can handle what they're supposed to be doing in Washington, D.C. They don't know to go down these rabbit holes. They haven't lived it. They don't know it. And so now all of a sudden you're going to try to get them to handle something that they're in the dark about?
So number two, number one, we just discussed subpoena power. So subpoena power only happens if, and this is my second question, it's you just mentioned it. Unionization, that means all Power Four conferences directed through their commissioner is going to sign. And James Franklin said this is probably through the presidential level, then the AD, then the coach. But the president's going to sign and saying, we are in. That means we are now unionized as far as compliant. I'm just focused on the compliance piece right now. That means we will not, so we give up the power to sue the guy's name from the College Football Commission. Uh, Will that, and like you said, if that doesn't happen, I'll tell you what, the skepticism in college sports is gonna be through the roof. Because if they've worked so hard on this and no one's then it's a joke, and
Yeah, I
I'm
think
worried
that
about
part
it.
I've heard is the presidents at each university are signing off on that. But that doesn't protect anybody from the lawsuits. Let's say, it's 15 years earlier and Mark Ingram's a great running back, a young running back at Alabama. And what is fair market value? Mark Ingram has somebody representing him. Those are where the lawsuits, I think, are coming hard, because who's to say, what's worth you basically, if somebody's willing to pay for him to be the face of their company, no one's stopping Joe Burrow or anybody else who are professional athletes about, oh, is that too much money? Is that too much money for
Right.
Ant-Man's shoe? Is that, like
I
all
got
these
you.
kinds of
I
different
got
deals?
you.
That's where all the lawsuits I think are coming. And again, when I referenced the 20% that some of the commission that these agents are taking, this has become a great um, business for them. Now all of a sudden you're going to tell them that the water faucet's getting turned off. I don't think that's going to happen as easily as, not, because again, this is the United States where people feel like, it's capitalism, and if you're saying you can't do that, you can't make so much money, or that deal is getting paid too much. Again, I think there'll be a lot of lawsuits coming down the pipeline very soon.
And last thing, Bruce, before we let you go, this 20.5 million was supposed to be like kind of, even keel, level the playing field so everyone has to operate by the same rules. But this NIL, you could still have like an advantage above everyone else because you can raise more money through your collective and your NIL still too. So like, what's the role NIL plays with this new 20.5 million that cap
Yeah,
that they
it's
have?
right now it's a little vague because some schools I've heard are not gonna have their collectives and some still will. And if if that is still the case, and I just think right now, look, it came up a lot last year. Ohio State had a roster of 20 million. They won a national title. A lot of that went to money to retain players, not to recruit. There were some of them obviously that certainly were added, but I think now we're talking about rosters that are 35, 40 million for this coming season, where we're going to be out all and watch some of these teams. It's 35, 40 million dollars, and a large part of that is NIL. I think people are crazy if they think you're going to tell college football coaches and ADs that, oh yeah, now you were paying that much money. Now it's going to go way back down to 20. That, things don't work that way. It's almost human nature. And again, I go back to something coach brought up at the beginning of this. We're talking about the most competitive people. And we're talking about Like Tennessee, when they first got in, one of the bigger NIL deals we've ever heard of was Nico Iamaleava doing when he was in high school, a deal for close to $10 million. That was in part because Tennessee's fan base and Tennessee's power structure was so desperate and frustrated because they hadn't been winning. Right now, the biggest version of, I guess, like where we see Oregon and Phil Knight, the mega booster, you have Cody Campbell, a former Texas Tech offensive lineman who made billions in the energy business, is now funding his athletic department at Texas Tech. I don't think that's going away. I think this is a supplement, and I think that you're going to have a lot of people who are now figuring out how do we budget, because you have different schools have different number of athletic programs, right, or
Yeah.
athletic teams underneath their umbrella.
Bruce, rapid response. Is college football in a better place now than it was last week?
I think so, because there's a little bit of closure, but they have new problems now.
Yeah. Fair to say. Fair to say. Bruce Feldman from The Athletic, and of course, our friend at Fox Sports. As always, thanks for joining us. Love the intelligence, Bruce. Thanks, buddy.
See you guys soon.
Bruce. Light it.